Hello, I am Jamey from Stonemaier Games, and I'm really excited today, genuinely excited to talk to designer Pam Walls about game design and some topics surrounding game design and content creation as well. Pam, thank you so much for joining me for today's conversation.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I really am looking forward to this, partially because one of your games has become one of my favorite games. We'll talk about that in a second. But Blob Party, I genuinely love it. I've introduced it to a ton of people over the last like 5 months since I discovered it, and I'm just grateful that you designed it. Thank you so much for designing this game.
Yeah, I'm glad you enjoy it. That's just so
Yeah.
cool. Just as you've been like holding one of my games, that's just like so cool. No, I'm glad you've enjoyed it. That's so awesome.
We love it. We love it. We even played it. We went to a place called the Gamers Ranch here in St. Louis or in Missouri a few months ago. I don't know if have you heard of this place?
Yes.
Yeah. And we had like 20 people, and at night, one of the nights we pulled out Blob Party, and we were playing it with like 8 people. I think it goes up to 7 or 8. Um,
Eight.
8, yeah.
Yeah.
And people kept drifting over and wanting to get involved, so we kind of just got rid of the Play-Doh, as fun as the Play-Doh is, and we just stood up and played a giant group game, probably 16 or 17 people of Blob Party, and
Love it.
people said it was one of the most memorable moments of that weekend. So
Oh,
thank you
that's
for
so cool
doing
to
that.
hear. Yeah, and
Yeah.
I know that some games have been played up to like 100 people,
Oh
and I saw a
wow,
video of that, and that was just so cool to see. Yeah, that's
that's
awesome.
incredible.
Yeah.
Well, why don't you let people know a little bit about who you are and this game and the other games that you've designed, so they can have some context for this conversation.
Sure. So, Blob Party is my third published game. I have another game called Hold That Face with Hasbro, and then Act Fast, which is a speed trades, another party game with Outset Media. And then I have another game coming out in a couple months, actually, finally, called Chronicles of Light Darkness Falls with Ravensburger. And that one is a cooperative strategy game. So yeah, I've been designing games for a very long time. The first time I can remember like sitting down to be like, I want to design a game was when I was 18. So I've been designing games for, in one way or another for about 20 years. And then about 10 years ago, I decided to get more serious about my board game designing and actually have an intention of getting a game published. And I initially thought I would self-publish, and then that's when I found your book, which I think we might talk about a bit more, but the Crowdfunder Strategy Guide. And that was just so much good information there that I learned so much. One of the biggest things was that the importance of getting involved with the community. And so that's when I started connecting with other designers and realizing there's a whole design community out there. And so got more and more involved, uh, learned more about design, played more different kinds of games, and have grown exponentially as a designer since then.
I think I first heard about you about 8 or 9 months ago. How long have you been doing the YouTube channel?
Just over 2 years.
Over 2 years. Okay. Well, I was late to the game then. I missed out on some good content. I probably need to go back and watch some of it. But I started subscribing around 8 or 9 months ago when you did a video. I did a blog post about it. I should have brought it up for this conversation, but it was about like, I don't know, like the 10 things that most designers should know, or first time designers, maybe. Do you
That
remember what it
sounds like
was?
something I would, yeah,
Yeah,
I'm
something
not
like that.
sure.
I'll link to it in the description. But it was a great video, and I did a blog post about it because I thought you had some wonderful insights, and that's when I discovered Blob Party and have followed your content ever
Oh, that
since.
one.
And
Yeah, I think that was Six Truths about the board game
Six truths.
industry.
That's right.
Right.
That's right.
Yeah.
And it's essentially a blog post of me just saying, yes, this is spot on. This is great advice, great insight from a designer. Um, But one of the things I even noticed early on, I think, when I was learning about your content, both the video content, and the games that you've designed, is that it seems to be a part of your focus to design a diverse array of games. Like you mentioned you have 3 party games out, but you have a strategy game coming out. I want to know a little bit more about that. How you decided that you wanted to kind of go wide instead of just focusing on one niche of games, and some of the methods that you have um, for approaching design in that way.
Yeah, absolutely. So I initially primarily only made party games,
Mhm.
primarily because those are the types of games that I played as a kid and as an adult. I love party games. They're so much fun, but
Mhm.
I didn't know enough about other genres to feel like I could contribute something new. But I knew the genre of party games enough that I was like, I know there's a game that doesn't exist already like this. So I felt comfortable working in that space. Since then, so yeah, within the past 10 years, I've definitely learned, now that I was more involved with the community, playing more games. Snakes and Lattes is an amazing board game cafe, one of the very first in Toronto. And so when I went in there and I just saw all the different kinds of games there are, I was just like, I wanted to play every game that I saw and just be exposed to so many different kinds of games as possible. And so now I'm, in the last few years, getting to a point where I feel like I know the different genres well enough that I feel like I could make something within those spaces as well. And
Mhm.
so I never want to limit myself or pigeonhole myself or only make certain types of games, certain genres. I also always want to be growing and evolving as a designer. So one of my favorite designers is Phil Walker Harding. And so he
Mhm.
has designed so many different kinds of games. And that's the kind of designer I want to be, where it's just such a wide variety of styles and genres and everything. So he's done party games like Sushi Go, but he's also done strategy games like Emotep and Spellbook. And he's always coming out with, it seems like, several new games a year. And so that's kind of what I want to do with my designs as well. I never want to limit myself. And I always want to be growing as a designer.
You seem to be playing a lot of games in different genres and with different mechanisms and themes recently as well. And probably not just recently, but you did a video very recently about 5 or 6 games that you played and an element of each that you learned something from. Is that part of your approach of playing a lot of different types of games with maybe different types of people? What is your approach for that?
Yeah, I intentionally play at least one new to me game every week.
Uh-huh.
And so I want to be exposed to as many different games as possible because it really is difficult to come up with a game that doesn't already exist, especially
Mhm.
if you're not aware of what is already out on the market. And
Yeah.
so I very intentionally try to play as many new games as possible. And so websites like Tabletopia and Board Game Arena are really great for that because you don't have to go spend a ton of money buying a bunch of games. You can try out different games using those services or even just watching how to play videos about different
Mhm.
games. I'm like, oh, I've never heard, that's a new game to me. I just want to see how that works. And just kind of being aware of all these different kinds of games that exist, that definitely helps me as a designer to, one, know what already exists. So I'm not creating a duplicate, but then
Mhm.
also getting inspiration from all these different kinds of games. I can maybe take a little bit from this game, a little bit from that game, mix them around, add something else to create something new.
I can relate to all of that, both playing a variety of games and also at one point I realized I can't play every single game, but there's a lot of amazing content out there. I think even in the video that you had the other day, you mentioned a game that I hadn't played. There's so many different people playing different games and talking about them, how to play videos, reviews, articles, podcasts. And so I
Right.
love listening to the content about games that I haven't played so I can learn about them. And sometimes I'm inspired to play them, but sometimes I just learn something that worked or didn't work in a game and
Right.
I can tuck away that information. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. I think that's really cool, and I'm excited to see what your game design looks like outside of the party game space. Although I would love for you to design something else as amazing as Blob Party as well. So yeah, I'm
Yeah.
excited about the Disney game.
Thanks.
No.
Yeah. And I'll always still design party games. I
Uh-huh.
love party games. And I think that maybe starting in party games has also helped me because party games, at the center, they're all about connection and
Mhm.
then really connecting with the people around the table. And so any game that I make, I want to have that feeling. And so
Yeah,
that kind of has translated to all my other designs in different genres as well, especially with cooperative strategy games. There's still a lot of similar elements there.
yeah, and that's actually Blob Party is a cooperative party game, and I found that that
Right.
is my that person. I know people have different preferences for party games. That is my sweet spot. I love to get
Nice.
together with when I'm in that environment of a social game, a party game.
Right.
I want to be working together with other people. I love like it's kind of there are 4 games on my or 5 games really on my shelf that fit this category. There's Fun Facts, Just One, and So Clover. And Telestrations is in there too as a game that I love. I don't know if it's not really cooperative, but we don't score when we play Telestrations.
Yeah.
But yeah, I love that genre, and I'm excited for you to be designing that space as well.
Thanks. Yeah. No, it's really fun.
Yeah. Um, we might come back to game design a little bit in the rest of this chat, but the other question I had for you was about a video that you filmed about the book Atomic Habits. And you have a great video about it. I will link to it in the description, so you don't have to recap the whole video, but I'm curious to hear, looking back at that video,
Right.
what are almost your takeaways about your experience filming that and talking about it? And I just wanted to kind of do a check-in because at the latter half of that video, you talk about the goals for yourself, how you are going to accomplish
Right.
those or implement those atomic habits. How is
Right.
that going? What has worked? What hasn't worked?
Yeah. So I think that's the most impactful video that I've made on my channel.
Mm-hmm.
It definitely doesn't have the most views, but it's definitely one of the videos I'm most proud of, because I think Atomic Habits, if anyone out there hasn't read it yet, it's a life-changing book. Just like how your book, like changed the trajectory of my career as a board game designer, this book has had a huge impact on my life, but also as a board game designer. So for me, what I've actually implemented in my day-to-day life after reading the book and after making that video, so there's a lot, but I'll focus on like the few things that have had the biggest impact. So Atomic Habits, one of the big things that's referencing is how, small changes, like how atoms are so small. And so making small little changes every single day that will compound over time and have a big impact in the future later on. So you're making small little things every single day, and they will continue to build up over time. And so every morning I will always pick what's my one to do for the day. And if I do that one thing, that's great. Everything else is a bonus,
Mm-hmm.
because especially as board game designers, we can make these laundry lists of all these things that we need to do. And if we don't do all of them every day, we feel like a failure, whatever. So just picking out one thing, one must do every day has really helped me feel a lot more just accomplished every day, that if I did that one thing, and then everything else is a bonus. So that I do every day for sure. Being specific about what I'm going to do, especially with my board game design stuff, rather than saying work on my prototype, or, update my prototype, work on board game design stuff. I want to be specific about update my 20 library cards for this game and import them into Tabletopia. Being very specific about numbers and what you're going to do and when you're going to do it and how you're going to do it is a lot more manageable than if you just have this broad statement about work on board game design stuff.
Right.
And that's what I was doing before. And now being more specific definitely helps and makes it more manageable, and you want to do it because you can see that that's a realistic thing to be able to do within an hour or whatever. Making things like good habits satisfying. So that's a big part of the book that James Clear talks about. And so once you've done something, rewarding yourself. And even if it's just checking that off a to-do list, which is surprisingly satisfying.
Yeah.
So just checking it off. And even if you hadn't written it down, write it down and then check it off, just to
I definitely do that.
yeah.
Yeah.
So then you get that satisfaction, you get that reward. If you want to also then go for a walk, or I will actually do a puzzle, like a short puzzle, like not like a 10-hour puzzle, but like I'll do like a fast 1-hour puzzle, and I'll even have the puzzle box like sitting there looking at me, so that I'm like, okay, I'm going to do this thing. I see I can do something fun after this, even though what I'm doing usually will end up being fun, but I have to motivate myself and have like a little reward sitting over there looking at me. So yeah, making things small habits, making them specific, making them satisfying, making them attractive. So if you can make it as fun as possible, maybe you can have your favorite drink, have your favorite snack while you're doing it, play your favorite music, like make it attractive and fun so you actually want to do the thing.
Right.
Those are, yeah, I could talk about this for a while, but like those are the big things. One last thing I'll say is just the issue of identity, especially for board game designers. A lot and newer board game designers, we will often say, I'm an aspiring board game designer, or I'm dabbling in board game design. And even myself, I struggled with that up until like a year ago when people ask, what do you do? When I had a day job, I would still say my day job.
Mhm.
Now I don't have a day job. I don't have that shield anymore.
Mhm.
So you have to say, I'm a board game designer. And it's like the more you say that and the more you say it out loud to other people, you really start to actually embody that identity. And then your daily habits will be a vote for that identity. And they'll
Mhm.
reinforce that identity. And it'll feel more natural to do those things because you identify as that person.
Yeah, that's a neat. I don't want to say a psychological trick, but it is a technique, a psychological technique to get yourself in that mindset. I, I love all that stuff. I love the idea of these little things that add up to a big result. Um,
Yeah.
when I was watching the video, I thought a little bit about uh, prototyping in particular, like the actual act of assembling a prototype after I've made it on the computer and I'm ready to assemble it. That's a That's the type of thing that I often procrastinate on. Like I get to that point, I'm like,
Right.
oh, do I really have to print out 20 sheets and then cut out all these hexes and cut out all these cards? And what I've
Right.
learned that helps make it a more palatable task is I'll break it up.
Yeah.
Actually, it isn't just that to prototype, and it's also sometimes getting to the table because I'm a little nervous about how it's going to play. I'm excited, but also nervous. And so I'll
Right.
break it. I'll on like Tuesday, I'll print it out. And that's it.
Mhm.
I'll just print it out.
Right.
And I'll go into it knowing that's all I'm going to do today. I'm not going to make this
Mhm.
big daunting thing where I have to do everything today. And then Wednesday, I'm going to cut it out. I'll do the
Right.
assembly portion of it. And usually then I'll put on a podcast or a video while I'm doing it. And then Thursday is when I actually do the playtest. I'm picking random days here, but I spread it out into little bite-sized chunks so that
Definitely.
I actually do it. And it's made a huge difference for
Right.
many of the different steps that you just mentioned.
No, absolutely. Yeah, breaking things down into smaller manageable tasks is huge. And one
Yeah.
other thing that I do all the time that I forgot, and as gamers, I think this is something we can all relate to, is setting a timer and being
Yeah.
like making it into a game, making it into a challenge,
Uh-huh.
seeing if you can actually do the thing within that time limit is amazing how effective that is, especially just for me. Like, I guess I'm incredibly competitive, but I just
Yeah.
like having that challenge of seeing, like, okay, can I do this within that certain amount of time? And it
Yeah.
just makes it like that much more enjoyable.
Is there anything from that list that when you made that video, that you envisioned yourself doing a certain way that didn't turn out that way, that you had to adjust it or tweak it, or did it all work out as you envisioned?
Um, it mostly Yeah, some of the wording I changed for some
Mhm.
things, like, and some of the, um yeah, one of the biggest things that I said in my video was, "I am going to work on my board game design stuff for 30 minutes after dinner at my
That's
dining
right.
room table." And,
Yeah.
like, being specific about when and where is definitely a good thing, but the biggest glaring thing in that statement is board game design stuff. What does that mean? That's just way too broad,
Right.
and so getting a lot more specific about what I'm going to do. I was focusing a lot more about when and where, but the what, I definitely realized after that video is incredibly important.
Yeah. I like that. Yeah. I set aside my after dinner time is specifically for game design. And even as I'm saying that, I'm thinking of what I actually did last night with that time instead, but it's meant to be just for game design.
Right.
Because this is my full-time job running Stonemaier Games,
Yeah.
and I have all sorts of tasks that happen during the day. But if I let those tasks bleed into my after dinner time, I I take away part of my job that gives me a lot of meaning, and that is the game design time. And so I really
Right.
try to set that time aside specifically for that and not let other stuff bleed into it. And that's
Yes.
been really helpful for me when I follow my own guidelines there, which doesn't
Yeah.
always happen.
And being like, compassionate to yourself is one of the biggest
Yeah.
things you can do as well. Because if you then feel bad about that, you make yourself feel bad about that, it
Yeah.
just makes things worse. So it's
That's
just like,
true.
hey, it didn't happen today. That's fine. We'll do it tomorrow. And
Yeah.
yeah, it's amazing how being compassionate to yourself is one of the biggest things to combat procrastination. You might think it's
Mhm.
the opposite, but no, it's actually true that way.
I like that. That's a great message. We're filming this at least in May. I don't know when it'll go live, but that's a great message, I think, for Mental Health Awareness Month in general, being compassionate to yourself. I really like that.
Totally.
So the last thing I wanted to ask you about was you've mentioned my crowdfunding book a little bit, a book that is largely geared towards not scaring away people from crowdfunding, to welcoming them into that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But you made the very interesting choice. It sounds like that you wanted to focus specifically on game design and working with publishers and not
Right.
self-publishing. And I'd love to hear your thought process behind that and what you learned that that other designers might want to think about.
Yeah. No, like that that book had such like a major impact on my trajectory. At that point, I was at a real crossroads. Do
Mhm.
I self-publish or do I learn more about how to pitch to publish? I didn't even know how that worked.
Yeah.
And so I read your book and I learned a lot, and I really appreciate the transparency in there and just the amount of information that's in there. And so if someone wants to do a Kickstarter, honestly, I think that reading your book should be a prerequisite. And because then they'll be more equipped to understand what is involved with running a
Mhm.
Kickstarter. A lot of people might just think, oh, it's not that big of a deal or it's not that hard or whatever. So after reading your book, they'll be more well equipped to run, hopefully, a successful Kickstarter campaign. Or they
Mhm.
might read it and realize that maybe it's just not for them. Either
Mhm.
way, they're going to be better off. So I read the book, and the biggest takeaways for me was you need to have a community before launching a Kickstarter. And
Mhm.
like I said, hadn't even played games with anyone outside my friends and family up until that point. So I just knew that that was a huge hurdle for me to have to try to build up a community before launching this game that I wanted to publish pretty soon. And
Mhm.
so I just felt like, okay, well, let me just get out into the community and see what happens. And just by getting out into the community, meeting other designers, I just started to learn more and more about design, and
Mhm.
therefore learned that my game that I wanted to self-publish was not anything that new or interesting. So it was through that I was like, maybe I need to focus more on making a great game
Mhm.
rather than just getting a game published. And so that was a big thing for me. The other thing was just realizing how much is involved with self-publishing.
Mhm.
I did not quite realize just how much is involved. So it felt like another full-time job on top of my day job and on top of designing games. So it felt like it'd be 3 full-time jobs. And just for me, that wouldn't be feasible.
Yeah.
The other thing was just the financial risk. I think
Mhm.
you outlined a few situations where you might end up losing quite a bit of money if you underestimate things or you overestimate things or you don't calculate things correctly, especially with shipping and things like that.
Right.
So I just, for me, just thinking about that financial risk, is that something that I was comfortable with? And just for me, I just wasn't. So that's something that I wanted to avoid.
Mhm.
And then the last thing was realizing that I really wanted to focus on designing games rather than the logistics side of manufacturing the games. So that just made me reflect on, well, what do I want to be? What do I want to do with my time? And I just realized that I want to be a board game designer. I don't
Mhm.
want to be a board game publisher. So, yeah, some major takeaways from that book for me.
You have a great recent video about a very transparent video about how much you've made so far as a game designer. I know money is just one side of this, but it is an important side, and it sounds like one of your goals is to be a full-time game designer. I recommend anyone watch that video if you want to get some context for it. And all of the numbers on that video are positive, whereas with
Right.
crowdfunding, some of those numbers could easily be negative
Right.
after you complete the project. Yeah. So
And that's a really
yeah.
good perspective to, for me, it's like, oh, I wish I was, making more and like
Mhm.
making enough to support myself. But it's true. At least they're not negative.
Right.
Like it'd
Right.
be very easily swing to the other side if you run a
Mhm.
Kickstarter and things don't go well. And that can happen fairly often. You might have a garage full of product that you can't move or, different things like that. And I haven't had to deal with that, but that was an
Yeah.
intentional choice on my part.
You mentioned also at the beginning of that answer, you talked about when you went to the community at first and found out that was that the game wasn't going to work, that people weren't excited by it, or that it already existed. Was that? Yeah.
It was just realizing that it was a very, very simple game, and
Okay.
my
Yeah.
main focus was on making it look beautiful. So I
Uh,
would spend the majority of my time, it was all about pattern matching. And so
uh-huh.
I would spend a lot of my time just creating the patterns, the colors. Just that was my main focus, was just in Illustrator and InDesign, making all these different colored patterns,
Yeah.
and the box art and the name and things like that. The gameplay, I mean, it was fun. It was just like a
Hmm.
speed matching pattern game,
Yeah.
but there was nothing, you know, like revolutionary about it.
Uh-huh.
So, or even new or unique or interesting. It was just very simple. So I quite easily archived that game and went down the path of coming up with as many games as possible and seeing what I can do, and just going through that creative process as much as possible till I get to something that there really is that spark through the gameplay more so than how it looks.
I really admired your self-awareness and humility in that moment, because I think a lot of us, I know for me, I have fallen in love with certain designs or certain mechanisms, certain themes, and pushed it when I should have just realized that it wasn't something that was appealing to even myself, but also to playtesters and other people.
Right.
So I think it's great that you realized that very early on, because I think sometimes people fall in love with their first design,
Yeah.
and that's your first. You only get one chance to have your first published design. So
Right.
yeah,
I mean, I did spend years on that
you
game,
did.
just to be clear.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, once I met other designers and saw all the cool things they were working on, once I started playing a variety of different games, that really opened my eyes. And I do think that has really helped me being open to that feedback, because
Mhm.
you're absolutely right that a lot of designers would get that, and it would make them hold on tighter to their game, want to
Right,
defend it, want to keep pushing forward, prove people wrong, whatever.
right.
So being open to feedback is one of a board game designer's biggest superpowers, for
Yeah.
sure.
And it's one of those things that I think is more difficult in practice than just saying it. Like I think we
Yeah.
all try to think, oh, of course I'm open to feedback. But then when you get that feedback, or when in that moment that you were hoping for affirmation and you actually get
Right.
constructive criticism instead, that's like the test. And that happens all the time. Um,
Absolutely.
yeah. Um, for anyone watching this, as you can see, I think I really like the way Pam thinks and talks about game design. I highly recommend checking out her channel and her games. Pam, do you have anything else that you want to leave the people who are watching this? Mostly probably game designers, people who play games. Anything that you want them to know?
If you're gonna run a Kickstarter, read Jamey's book. Um, yeah, check out my channel. But it was just so great to meet you finally in
Yeah.
person. This is a big like full circle moment, I guess you could say, for me. So I just really appreciate all that you've done for the community, and your transparency has had a huge impact on me. So for me to be transparent with others, that's a large part has to do with seeing that from you as well. And so just thank you so much for the opportunity and for meeting you.
Well, thanks, Pam. That means a lot to me. Um, and if anyone has any questions, feel free to ask in the comments below. I'll let Pam know if you have any questions for her. All right. Thanks,
Sounds
Pam.
good. Thank you.